The dust hadn't even settled behind Kieran Dalton's horse when Katherine Turner realized she'd made the biggest mistake of her life telling him to leave Jackson, Wyoming forever. It was June 1878, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town nestled in the valley, surrounded by the Teton Range. Katherine stood on the porch of her late father's general store, watching the man she loved ride away because she'd been too afraid to admit the truth. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving her alone to run the business at 22 years old, and everyone in town had expectations. The church-going ladies whispered that a proper young woman didn't consort with a drifter, even one as hardworking and honest as Kieran. The town council members reminded her that reputation was everything for a business owner. And her Aunt Marguerite, who'd come from Boston to help Katherine through her grief, had been the loudest voice of all, insisting that Katherine needed to marry someone established, someone respectable, not a cowboy who worked odd jobs and had barely $2 to his name. So when Kieran had finally worked up the courage that morning to tell Katherine how he felt, standing in the back room of her store with his hat in his hands and his heart in his eyes, she'd crushed him. She'd told him she could never feel that way about him, that he should leave town and find his fortune elsewhere, that there was nothing for him in Jackson. The look on his face had nearly killed her. She'd watched the light die in those blue eyes, watched his shoulders sag as he nodded once, placed his hat back on his head and walked out without another word. Within an hour, he'd packed his few belongings, saddled his bay gelding and ridden south toward the pass. That had been 2 hours ago, and Katherine had been standing on this porch for the last 30 minutes, tears streaming down her face, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. What had she done? Kieran was the kindest man she'd ever known. He'd helped her father fix the store's roof last summer. He'd taught her how to handle the rowdy cowboys who sometimes came in drunk and demanding. He'd sat with her through the long nights after her father passed, never expecting anything, just offering his quiet presence and steady comfort. He'd been there for every hard moment of the past year, and she'd repaid him by lying straight to his face about her feelings. Because she did have feelings for him. She was completely, desperately in love with him. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he always smelled like leather and pine, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. She loved his deep laugh, his careful hands, the way he read dime novels in the evening and always remembered little details about conversations they'd had weeks ago. She loved him so much it terrified her, and that terror had made her cruel. "You did the right thing," Aunt Marguerite said from behind her, having stepped out of the store. She was a thin, severe woman of 45 with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "That cowboy would have brought you nothing but hardship. Now we can focus on finding you a proper husband. Perhaps Mr. Henderson, the banker. He's been widowed for a year now and quite prosperous." Katherine spun around, and the look on her face must have been fierce because her aunt actually took a step back. "Mr. Henderson is 50 years old and boring as dirt. And Kieran Dalton is worth 10 of him." "Then why did you send him away?" Marguerite demanded. "Because I'm a coward," Katherine said, her voice breaking. "Because I listened to everyone telling me what I should do instead of following my own heart. Because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing him," Katherine whispered. "Papa died so suddenly. I'm terrified that if I let myself love someone they'll be taken from me too. But sending Kieran away hurts worse than any fear. I can't breathe, Aunt Marguerite. I feel like I'm dying." Her aunt's expression softened slightly. "Katherine, you've been through a terrible loss. These feelings will pass." "No," Katherine said firmly, wiping her eyes. "They won't. I love him. I've loved him for months, maybe longer. and I just sent away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to fight for what I want." She looked down the road again toward the southern pass where Kieran had disappeared. Her heart clenched painfully. He'd be miles away by now, probably thinking she didn't care about him at all, probably hating her. She'd hurt him so badly. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. "I have to go after him," Katherine said suddenly. "What? Don't be ridiculous. A young lady doesn't chase after a man like some common—" "I don't care," Katherine interrupted. "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. I'm going after him." She rushed back into the store, her practical nature taking over despite her emotional state. She couldn't just run off unprepared. She grabbed a canvas bag and started filling it with supplies: jerky, hardtack, a canteen. She tied on her riding skirt, the one she used when she needed to make supply runs to the neighboring ranches. She found her father's old pistol and holster, checking to make sure it was loaded. The wilderness between here and the next town was dangerous, with bears, mountain lions, and occasionally hostile drifters. "Katherine, stop this madness at once," Marguerite insisted, following her around the store. "You're a respectable business owner. What will people say?" "Let them say whatever they want," Katherine shot back, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone else wanted. Papa never asked that of me. He taught me to be strong and independent and to make my own choices. Well, this is my choice. I'm choosing Kieran." She grabbed the store keys and pressed them into her aunt's hands. "Please watch the store. I'll be back as soon as I can, with Kieran if he'll forgive me." Before her aunt could protest further, Katherine hurried out to the small stable behind the store where she kept her mare, Bella. A sturdy chestnut quarter horse her father had given her for her 18th birthday. She saddled the mare quickly, her hands shaking but efficient, then mounted and urged Bella into a gallop down the main street of Jackson. People stopped to stare as she rode past. She saw Mrs. Hutchins, the preacher's wife, standing in front of the church with her mouth hanging open. She saw Tom Bradley, who ran the saloon, grinning and giving her a little salute. She saw a group of cowboys whooping and hollering encouragement. Let them all watch. She didn't care anymore. She was done living her life according to other people's rules. The road south out of Jackson was dusty and rutted from wagon traffic. Katherine pushed Bella hard, faster than was probably wise, but urgency drove her. Kieran had a 2-hour head start. He could be 10 miles away or more by now, depending on how fast he'd ridden. Had he pushed his horse hard, eager to put distance between himself and the woman who'd rejected him? Or had he ridden slowly, nursing his broken heart? The thought of Kieran hurting because of her made Katherine's eyes burn with fresh tears, but she blinked them away. She needed to focus on the road and on finding him. The landscape around her was breathtaking, towering mountains with snow still clinging to their peaks despite the summer heat, vast meadows filled with wildflowers, stands of pine and aspen. She and Kieran had ridden through this country together once, when she'd needed to deliver supplies to the Harrison Ranch. He'd pointed out eagles soaring overhead and shown her how to identify animal tracks in the soft earth. He'd made her laugh with stories about his childhood in Kansas, about the trouble he and his brothers had gotten into. He told her that day that he thought Wyoming was the most beautiful place on earth, but when he'd said it, he'd been looking at her, not the mountains. How had she been so blind to what was right in front of her? How had she let fear and other people's opinions nearly destroy her chance at happiness? Bella's hooves pounded against the hard, packed earth, and Katherine leaned forward in the saddle, urging her mare faster. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on her head and shoulders. She'd forgotten to grab a hat in her haste, but she didn't care. Nothing mattered except finding Kieran and telling him the truth. She'd been riding for almost an hour when she spotted a rider ahead, moving slowly along the road. Her heart leaped into her throat. Even from a distance, she recognized the set of those shoulders, the way he sat his horse. It was Kieran, but he wasn't headed south anymore. He'd turned his horse around and was riding back toward Jackson. Katherine pulled Bella to a halt, confusion and hope warring in her chest. Why was he coming back? She watched as the distance between them closed, watched as Kieran's head came up and he saw her. Even from 50 yards away, she could see him stiffen in his saddle. He urged his bay gelding into a faster trot, and soon they were face to face in the middle of the road, their horses dancing nervously, both riders breathing hard. "Katherine," Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. "What are you doing out here?" Now that she was face to face with him, Katherine found words inadequate to express everything she felt. She dismounted quickly, and Kieran did the same, both of them dropping their reins and letting their horses wander to the side of the road to graze. "I came after you," Katherine said, her voice shaking. "I couldn't let you leave. I couldn't let you ride away thinking that I don't care about you, because I do. I care so much that it terrifies me." Kieran stood about 10 feet away, his hat shadowing his face, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "You told me to leave. You said there was nothing for me in Jackson." "I lied," Katherine said, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "I lied because I was scared and because I've been listening to everyone else telling me what my life should look like instead of deciding for myself. But I'm done with that. I'm done being afraid. Kieran, I love you. I've loved you for so long, and I was too much of a coward to say it until you walked out that door and I felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest." Kieran took a step toward her, then stopped. "You love me." "Yes," Katherine said, closing the distance between them herself. "I love the way you treat everyone with kindness. I love how you helped my father and how you've helped me. I love your patience and your strength and your gentle heart. I love how you make me laugh even on the hardest days. I love everything about you, and I'm so sorry I hurt you. I'm so sorry I pushed you away. If you can forgive me, if you can give me another chance, I promise I'll never let fear make my decisions again." She was standing right in front of him now, close enough to see the storm of emotions crossing his face. Hope, disbelief, pain, and underneath it all, love. So much love it took her breath away. "You really love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "With everything I am," Katherine said. "Why were you riding back? Did you forget something in town?" Kieran let out a shaky laugh, reaching up to remove his hat and run a hand through his dark hair. "I made it about 10 miles down the road. I got to Munger Creek, and I stopped to water my horse, and I just sat there thinking about how I was supposed to ride away and build a new life somewhere else. And I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave you, Katherine. I love you too much. I figured even if you didn't love me back, even if you married someone else someday, I'd rather be in the same town as you, seeing you sometimes, than trying to live without you. So I turned around. I was coming back to Jackson to beg for my old job at the livery and to at least be near you, even if I couldn't be with you." Katherine started crying harder, but these were tears of relief and joy. "You only made it 10 miles. 10 miles, and then I had to turn around," Kieran said, and then he was pulling her into his arms, and she was holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "I couldn't do it, Katherine. I couldn't leave you. I'm so sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I'm so sorry I hurt you. You're here now," he said, his arms tightening around her. "You came after me. You said you love me. That's all that matters." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, reaching up to cup his face with her hands. "I do love you so much. And I don't care what anyone in town says about it. You're the man I want, Kieran Dalton. You're the only man I want. I'm not established or respectable, he warned, but there was a smile tugging at his lips now. I don't have much money saved. I can't offer you fancy things. I don't want fancy things, Katherine said. I want you. I want your kindness and your laughter and your love. I want to build a life with you. That's all I've ever wanted. I was just too afraid to admit it. You're not afraid now. I'm terrified, she admitted honestly. I'm terrified of losing you, of something happening to you. But I'm more afraid of living without you. That fear this morning when you rode away, that was worse than anything. I'd rather have whatever time we get together than play it safe and lose you because I was too scared to take a chance. Kieran smiled then, really smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. I'm not going anywhere, Katherine. I promise you that. I'm going to be by your side for as long as you'll have me. Forever then, Katherine said. I want forever. Forever sounds perfect, Kieran said. And then he kissed her. Katherine had been kissed before, awkward stolen kisses from boys when she was younger, but nothing had prepared her for this. Kieran kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything he'd ever wanted, tender and passionate and full of promise. She melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, kissing him back with all the love and longing she'd been suppressing for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. We should probably head back to town before people start worrying. Let them worry, Katherine said, but she knew he was right. Although I suppose Aunt Marguerite is probably having conniptions about me leaving her in charge of the store. Your aunt doesn't approve of me, Kieran said, stating the obvious. My aunt doesn't approve of much of anything, Katherine replied, but this is my life, not hers. And I'm choosing you. They gathered their horses, and Kieran helped Katherine mount Bella even though she was perfectly capable of mounting herself. She loved that about him, the way he was respectful of her independence but still wanted to take care of her. They rode side by side back toward Jackson, close enough that their legs occasionally brushed, sending little sparks of awareness through Katherine every time they touched. What made you realize you needed to come after me? Kieran asked as they rode. I mean, I'm grateful you did, but you seemed pretty certain this morning when you told me to leave. Katherine sighed. I've been lying to myself for months, trying to convince myself that I couldn't have feelings for you because of what everyone else thought. When you told me how you felt and I saw the hope in your eyes, I panicked. All I could think about was how much it would hurt if I let myself love you and then lost you like I lost Papa. So I pushed you away. But the moment you were gone, I realized that losing you through my own fear and cowardice hurt just as much, maybe more, because it was my choice. At least if I love you and something happens beyond our control, I'll have had the time we spent together. I'll have the memories of loving you and being loved by you. That's worth the risk. Nothing's going to happen to me, Kieran said firmly. I plan on living a long, boring life right here in Jackson with you. Promise me you'll be careful, though, Katherine said, looking over at him. No unnecessary risks. I promise, he said, reaching over to take her hand. They rode like that for a while, hands clasped between their horses, until the terrain got rougher and they needed both hands for their reins. As they approached Jackson, Katherine started to feel nervous. She'd ridden out of town in dramatic fashion, and now she was coming back with the man she'd supposedly sent away. The gossip was going to be intense, but when she glanced at Kieran and saw the happiness on his face, she decided she didn't care. Let people talk. She'd spent too long caring about what others thought. They rode into town in the late afternoon, and sure enough, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Katherine kept her head high and her hand firmly clasped in Kieran's. They rode straight to the general store, where Aunt Marguerite stood on the porch with her arms crossed, looking like a disapproving sentinel. "I see you found him," Marguerite said tartly as they dismounted. "I did," Katherine said, not letting go of Kieran's hand. "Aunt Marguerite, I love Kieran and he loves me. We're going to be together and I hope you can accept that and be happy for me. But even if you can't, my decision is made." Her aunt studied them both for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. Finally, she sighed. "Your father always said you had more spirit than sense. I can see he was right. But he also taught you to follow your heart, and I suppose I should respect that, even if I think you're making things harder on yourself than they need to be." It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it wasn't outright condemnation either. Katherine decided to take it as progress. "How was the store?" Katherine asked. "Busy," Marguerite said. "Mrs. Chen came in for flour and seemed disappointed you weren't here to chat. Mr. Peterson needed nails and left the money on the counter, and half the town has found excuses to walk past and see if you're back yet." She looked at Kieran. "I hope you're prepared for the attention, young man. My niece has made quite the spectacle." "I don't mind," Kieran said, squeezing Katherine's hand. "Let them look. I'm proud to be with Katherine." Despite herself, Marguerite's expression softened slightly. "Well, you're either very brave or very foolish. Time will tell which." She turned to head back into the store, then paused. "Katherine, you should know that Reverend Hutchins's wife came by. She seemed quite scandalized by your behavior. I expect she'll want to have words with you." "She can have all the words she wants," Katherine said. "It won't change anything." After Marguerite went inside, Kieran turned to Katherine. "Are you sure about this? I don't want to make your life difficult." "You make my life better," Katherine said firmly. "Everything else we'll handle together. Now let me get you something to eat. You must be hungry after all that riding." They went into the store together, and Katherine put together a meal of bread, cheese, and dried apples from her inventory. They sat in the back room, the same room where that morning had started so badly and was now ending so differently. As they ate, they talked about practical things. Where would Kieran live? He'd been renting a room above the livery, but that was hardly appropriate now that they were courting. Katherine suggested he could rent the small house next to the store that had belonged to her father's assistant before he'd moved to Colorado. "We should probably think about when we want to get married," Kieran said, and Katherine's heart did a little flip at hearing him say it so matter-of-factly, like of course they were getting married. "How long do you think we need to wait?" Katherine asked. "I mean, there are conventions about courting for a certain period, but honestly, I've known you for over a year. It's not like we're strangers." Kieran grinned. "Are you saying you want to marry me soon, Miss Turner?" "I'm saying I don't want to wait any longer than necessary, Mr. Dalton," Katherine replied, feeling bold. "I've already wasted enough time being afraid. Why wait when we both know what we want?" "Your aunt is going to say we're rushing," Kieran pointed out. "My aunt thinks everything happens too fast except the mail delivery from Boston," Katherine said. "I don't want to be disrespectful, but this is my life, our life. We should make our own timeline." "Then let's give it a month," Kieran suggested. "That gives us time to make arrangements for me to save up a bit more money, and it's long enough that people can't say we just rushed into it without thinking." "A month," Katherine agreed. "July 15th. We can have the ceremony here in Jackson, small and simple." "Nothing about you is simple," Kieran teased, and Katherine laughed. They spent the evening together, and Kieran helped Katherine close up the store. Before he left for his room at the livery, he pulled her close on the porch and kissed her again, this time slow and sweet and full of promise. Katherine watched him walk away, but this time she wasn't sad. This time, she knew he was coming back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity and gossip. Mrs. Hutchins did indeed come to lecture Katherine about propriety and rushing into things, but Katherine politely held her ground. She was surprised to find that several townspeople were actually supportive. Tom Bradley from the saloon offered to host a small celebration after the wedding. The widow Chen, who ran a laundry business, offered to make Katherine a new dress. Even stern old Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store, gruffly told Kieran he was getting a good woman and he'd better treat her right. There was negative gossip too, of course. Some of the more established families thought Katherine was lowering herself. A few of the single women in town who'd had their eyes on Kieran were bitter about the quick engagement. But Katherine found that she genuinely didn't care. She was too happy to let other people's opinions dim her joy. Kieran moved into the small house next to the store, and they spent their evenings together, talking about their future and making plans. Kieran had some money saved, and he'd been working odd jobs around town. He told Katherine his dream was to start a small ranch outside of town, maybe breed horses. Katherine loved the idea and started thinking about how they could make it work. Her father had left her some money along with the store, and she had a good business sense. Together, they could build something. One evening about 2 weeks before the wedding, they were sitting on the porch of Katherine's store, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Kieran had his arm around Katherine's shoulders, and she was leaned against him, feeling more content than she could ever remember. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come after me?" Kieran asked quietly. "All the time," Katherine admitted, "and it terrifies me. I was so close to losing us, because I was too afraid to take a chance." "I would have come back anyway," Kieran reminded her. "I only made it 10 miles before I had to turn around." "But if you'd made it further, if you'd kept going, we might have lost each other forever," Katherine said. "I'm so grateful I came to my senses when I did. I'm so grateful you turned around." "I think we were always meant to find our way to each other," Kieran said. "Even if you hadn't come after me, even if I'd made it further down the road, I think eventually we would have found our way back. Some things are just meant to be." "Do you really believe that?" Katherine asked, turning to look up at him. "I do," Kieran said. "I think you're my person, Katherine. The one I'm supposed to spend my life with. And I think I'm yours. That kind of connection doesn't just disappear because of time or distance." Katherine kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, she whispered, "I can't wait to be your wife." "2 more weeks," Kieran said. "And then you're stuck with me forever. Promise?" Katherine asked. "Promise," Kieran said, sealing it with another kiss. The morning of July 15, 1878, dawned clear and beautiful. Katherine woke early in the small bedroom above the store, butterflies dancing in her stomach. Today was her wedding day. She was marrying Kieran Dalton and starting a new chapter of her life. Aunt Marguerite helped her dress in the new gown Mrs. Chen had made, a simple but elegant dress in pale blue cotton with delicate white lace at the collar and cuffs. Her aunt had warmed to Kieran over the past month, impressed by his work ethic and the obvious devotion he showed Katherine. She still thought they were rushing, but she'd stopped voicing her objections quite so loudly. "You look beautiful," Marguerite said, arranging Katherine's hair in a simple updo with a few loose curls framing her face. "Your father would be proud of you. Not necessarily of the speed with which you're doing this, but of the woman you've become, strong and sure of yourself." "I wish he could be here," Katherine said, tears threatening. "He is here," Marguerite said softly. "In your strength, in your determination, in the way you run this store and take care of this community. He's part of everything you do, and I think he'd like Kieran. Your father always valued character over status, and that young man has character." The ceremony took place at noon in the small church, with most of the town in attendance. Jackson's population was only about 200 people, and everyone loved a wedding. Katherine walked down the aisle without anyone to give her away, having decided she was giving herself to Kieran of her own free will as an equal partner. She'd considered asking her aunt, but in the end, she wanted to walk alone, making her own choice clear. Kieran stood at the front of the church looking both nervous and impossibly handsome in new trousers and a pressed white shirt. His eyes lit up when he saw Katherine, and she watched him mouth the word beautiful as she walked toward him. Reverend Hutchins performed the ceremony, and despite his wife's disapproval, he was kind and sincere in his words about love and commitment. When it came time for vows, Kieran took both of Katherine's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Katherine, I promise to love you through every season of life. I promise to support your dreams and to build a future with you. I promise to be honest with you, to respect you, and to choose you every day for the rest of my life. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I'm honored that you chose me too. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." Katherine's eyes were full of tears as she spoke her own vows. "Kieran, I promise to love you with courage without fear holding me back. I promise to be your partner in everything, to support your dreams as you support mine. I promise to choose love over fear, to choose us over what anyone else thinks we should be. You've taught me what it means to be brave, and I promise to face life's challenges with you by my side. I love you with everything I am, and I choose you, today and always." When Reverend Hutchins pronounced them husband and wife, and told Kieran he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was tender and sweet, and full of promise. The small church erupted in applause and cheers, and Katherine laughed against Kieran's lips, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. They had a celebration at Tom Bradley's saloon, which he'd cleaned up and decorated for the occasion. There was food and dancing, and several people gave toasts. Tom himself gave a surprisingly eloquent speech about how love was the best thing that could happen in a hard frontier life. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears and told Katherine she deserved all the happiness in the world. Even stern Mr. Peterson cracked a smile and told Kieran not to mess it up. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Kieran pulled Katherine outside for a moment of quiet. They stood in the street, the sounds of laughter and music spilling out from the saloon behind them, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above. "Hello, Mrs. Dalton," Kieran said, and Katherine's heart fluttered at hearing her new name. "Hello, Mr. Dalton," she replied, sliding her arms around his waist. "How does it feel to be a married man?" "Like everything finally makes sense," he said honestly. "Like my whole life led me to this moment to you. How does it feel to be a married woman?" "Like coming home," Katherine said. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They stood there together, holding each other under the Wyoming sky, and Katherine thought about how close she'd come to losing this. She thought about that morning a month ago when she'd sent Kieran away, and how empty the world had felt without him. She thought about Kieran making it 10 miles and turning around, unable to leave her even when he thought she didn't love him back. She thought about her desperate ride to find him, and the relief and joy of discovering he was already coming back. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. "Thank you for turning around." "Thank you for coming after me," Kieran replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to fight for us." They kissed again, this time with no audience, just the two of them and the promise of forever stretching out ahead. Katherine and Kieran spent their wedding night in the small house next to the store, the one that was now officially their home. They made love with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the way of newlyweds, learning what brought pleasure and joy. Katherine had been nervous, but Kieran was patient and loving, and by the time they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, She felt closer to him than she'd ever felt to another person. The next morning, they woke early and lay in bed talking about their future. They decided to keep running the general store together, with Katherine handling most of the day-to-day operations while Kieran took on the heavy labor and helped with deliveries. In the meantime, they would save money toward Kieran's dream of a small ranch. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few months. Katherine found that marriage suited her. She loved having Kieran by her side every day, loved the small intimacies of domestic life together. They worked well as a team, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's efforts. The store continued to do well, and they were able to save a little money each month toward their ranch dream. Aunt Marguerite stayed in Jackson for another 2 months before announcing she needed to return to Boston. Before she left, she pulled Katherine aside for a private conversation. "I was wrong about him," Marguerite admitted. "Kieran is a good man and he loves you deeply. I can see that you're happy, truly happy, in a way I'm not sure I've ever been. Your father raised you to follow your heart and you did. I'm proud of you for that, even if I didn't show it at first." "Thank you, Aunt Marguerite," Katherine said, embracing her aunt. "Thank you for staying and helping me, even when you didn't approve of my choices." "That's what family does," Marguerite said. "We don't always agree, but we show up. Now you write to me and let me know how you're doing. And if you need anything at all, you let me know." After her aunt left, Katherine felt a strange sense of freedom. She loved her aunt, but Marguerite's presence had been a reminder of propriety and expectations. With her gone, Katherine and Kieran could truly make their own way without worrying about judgment. As autumn arrived and the aspens turned gold in the mountains around Jackson, Katherine began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Kieran, not wanting to get his hopes up prematurely. But when another month passed and her suspicions were confirmed, she could barely contain her excitement. She told him one evening after they'd closed the store. They were having dinner in their small kitchen, and Katherine was so nervous her hands were shaking. "Kieran, I have something to tell you," she said, setting down her fork. He looked up immediately, concerned by her tone. "What's wrong? Are you all right?" "Nothing's wrong," Katherine said quickly. "Everything is right, actually. Very right. I'm pregnant, Kieran. We're going to have a baby." The expression on his face went through about 5 different emotions in as many seconds. Shock, disbelief, joy, wonder, and finally an overwhelming tenderness that made Katherine's eyes fill with tears. "A baby," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "We're having a baby." "Yes," Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Sometime in late spring, if I'm calculating correctly." Kieran was out of his chair in an instant, pulling Katherine to her feet and into his arms. He held her carefully like she might break, his face buried in her hair. "Katherine, this is incredible. This is the best news. We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, even though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Kieran said, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "I'm thrilled. I'm terrified. I'm grateful beyond words. I love you so much, and I love this little life we've created together." They stood there in their kitchen, holding each other and marveling at the miracle of new life. Katherine felt a different kind of fear than what had almost made her push Kieran away. This was the fear of how much she had to lose now, not just Kieran but their child, their growing family. But she pushed the fear down and chose faith instead. She chose to believe that they would have many happy years together, that they would raise their child and maybe more children in love and safety. "We need to start planning," Katherine said practically, even as she remained in the circle of Kieran's arms. "We'll need a cradle and baby clothes. We should expand the house, add another room, and we need to tell people though I suppose everyone will figure it out soon enough. We have time for all of that, Kieran said. Right now, I just want to hold you and think about how lucky I am. How different life would be if you hadn't come after me that day, if I hadn't turned around. But I did come after you, Katherine said. And you did turn around. And now look at us. Married, expecting a baby, building a life together. Everything worked out exactly how it was supposed to. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Katherine continued working in the store as long as she was able, finally letting Kieran take over more of the duties as she grew larger and more uncomfortable. The women of Jackson rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Even Mrs. Hutchins, who'd been so disapproving of the quick marriage, softened when she learned about the baby and brought over a beautiful quilt she'd made. Kieran was attentive and devoted, anticipating Katherine's needs before she even voiced them. He rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings and brought her whatever strange food combinations she was craving. He talked to her growing belly, telling their unborn child stories and making promises about the life they would give this baby. In February, during a brief thaw, Kieran surprised Katherine with news that he'd found land for sale about 3 miles outside of Jackson. It was 50 acres with a small cabin, a barn, and good grazing land. The previous owner had moved back east and was selling it for a fair price. "I've been saving everything I can," Kieran told her, his eyes bright with excitement. "And I talked to the bank about a loan for the rest. We could have our ranch, Katherine. We could raise horses and cattle, grow our own food, give our children room to run and play. The cabin needs work, but it's solid. We could fix it up, make it a real home." "Children?" Katherine asked, smiling at the plural. "You're already planning for more than one." "I'm hoping for half a dozen at least," Kieran teased, "if you're willing." "Let's see how this first one goes," Katherine laughed. "But yes, I want more children. I want a house full of love and laughter, and I want our ranch. Let's do it, Kieran. Let's buy that land and build our dream." They purchased the land in early March, and Kieran spent every spare moment working on the cabin and outbuildings, getting them ready for the family to move. Katherine stayed in town, running the store and preparing for the baby's arrival, which was expected in late April or early May. On April 28th, Katherine's labor began in the middle of the night. Kieran rode through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Chen, who served as the town's midwife, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing and praying while the women worked. Katherine's labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Kieran feared he might lose her, feared that his happiness had been too good to last. But Katherine was strong, just as strong as he'd always known her to be. And as the sun was setting on April 29th, their son entered the world. Kieran was allowed into the bedroom to meet his child, and the sight of Katherine, exhausted but glowing, holding their tiny son in her arms, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Meet your son," Katherine said softly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "I thought we could name him Kenneth, after my father." "Kenneth Dalton," Kieran said, tears streaming down his face as he gently touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his father's finger, and Kieran felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "He's perfect, Katherine. You're perfect. I love you both so much." "We did it," Katherine whispered, looking up at him with tired but happy eyes. "We made a family." "We did," Kieran agreed, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed so he could put his arms around both his wife and his son. "And this is just the beginning." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Kenneth was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs, and Katherine took to motherhood with the same determination and grace she brought to everything. Kieran was a devoted father, taking over all the store duties so Katherine could rest and care for the baby. He'd never known he could love someone as fiercely as he loved his tiny son. By June, Katherine was recovered enough that they were able to move to the ranch. They kept the store, hiring a young man named James Robertson to manage it during the days, but their primary residence became the cabin on their land. It was smaller and more rustic than the house in town, but Katherine loved it immediately. She loved the view of the mountains, the sound of the wind through the pines, the feeling of space and possibility. Kieran bought a few horses and began his breeding program, starting small but with big dreams. Katherine planted a garden and kept chickens, finding joy in the simple rhythms of ranch life. Kenneth grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who seemed to love the ranch as much as his parents did. One evening in late summer, after they'd put Kenneth to bed in his cradle, Katherine and Kieran sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Kieran had his arm around Katherine, and she was leaned against his shoulder, feeling perfectly content. "Do you ever think about that day?" Katherine asked. "The day you left and then came back." "All the time," Kieran admitted. "It was the worst and best day of my life. Worst when you told me to leave, best when I saw you riding toward me and realized you'd come after me." "I think about what you said, about only making it 10 miles before you had to turn around," Katherine said. "About how you couldn't leave me even though you thought I didn't love you back. That takes such courage, Kieran, to come back and face potential rejection again, just to be near me." "It wasn't courage," Kieran said. "It was necessity. Living without you wasn't possible. I tried for about 2 hours before I realized it. 10 miles was as far as I could get before my heart made me turn around." "I'm so glad you did," Katherine said. "I'm so glad we both found the courage to fight for this. Look at what we would have missed." They looked out at their land, at the horses grazing in the pasture, at the cabin that was slowly becoming a real home, at the life they were building together. Inside, their son slept peacefully, the first of what they hoped would be many children. They had their health, their love, their dreams coming true bit by bit. "No regrets?" Kieran asked, turning to press a kiss to Katherine's temple. "Not a single one," Katherine said firmly. "You're the best decision I ever made. This life is everything I never knew I wanted." "I love you, Katherine Dalton," Kieran said. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for being brave enough to come after me. Thank you for this life." "I love you too," Katherine said. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for turning around." They sat there as the sun set and the stars came out, holding each other and counting their blessings. The wild frontier life wasn't easy, but they faced it together, partners in every sense of the word. And that made all the difference. As the years passed, the Dalton Ranch grew and prospered. Kieran's horse breeding program became well known throughout Wyoming, and people came from as far as Cheyenne to buy his animals. Katherine continued to oversee the general store in Jackson, riding into town several times a week to check on things and maintain her connections with the community. She found she could balance both roles, ranch wife and businesswoman, and she was proud of that balance. Kenneth grew into a bright, energetic toddler, and when he was 2 years old, Katherine became pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Caitlin, was born in the spring of 1881. She had Katherine's green eyes and Kieran's dark hair, and she was adored by her older brother from the moment she arrived. 2 years after Caitlin came another son, Kyle, who was the most easygoing of their children, content to watch the world with quiet curiosity. And 3 years after that, their family was completed with the birth of twins, a boy and girl they named Kevin and Kendra. 5 children kept Katherine and Kieran busy from dawn until well past dark, but they wouldn't have changed a thing. Their cabin had been expanded several times to accommodate the growing family, and it was always full of noise and laughter and love. The children grew up riding horses, helping with ranch work, and learning both from their mother's head for business and their father's skill with animals. On their 10th wedding anniversary in July 1888, Katherine and Kieran took a rare evening to themselves. The older children were watching the younger ones, and the couple rode out to a meadow on their property where they'd sometimes gone to be alone when they could steal the time. 10 years, Katherine marveled, dismounting from Bella, who was now a dignified older horse but still Katherine's favorite. "Can you believe it's been 10 years? Best 10 years of my life," Kieran said, spreading out a blanket he'd brought and pulling Katherine down to sit beside him. "Though also the fastest. Feels like just yesterday you were riding after me on the road south of Jackson." 5 children, a successful ranch, a thriving business, Katherine listed. "We've built quite a life." "We have," Kieran agreed, pulling her close. "And I'd do it all over again. Every sleepless night, every hard season, every challenge. It's all been worth it to have this life with you." Katherine thought about the frightened young woman she'd been at 22, so afraid of loss that she'd almost pushed away the best thing in her life. She thought about the courage it had taken to ride after Kieran, to admit her feelings, to choose love over fear. And she thought about Kieran, making it only 10 miles before his heart made him turn around, unable to leave her even when he thought she didn't love him back. "Do you know what I'm most grateful for?" Katherine asked. "What's that?" "That we were both brave when it mattered," she said. "You were brave enough to tell me how you felt, even though you didn't know if I felt the same way. You were brave enough to turn around and come back when leaving was too hard. And I was brave enough to admit I'd been wrong, to go after you, to fight for us. We were both brave enough to choose love, and look at everything that's come from that choice." "I think courage is easier when you know what you're fighting for," Kieran said. "I knew you were worth fighting for, worth risking rejection for. And you're right. Look at what we would have missed if either of us had given up. These 10 years, our children, this life we've built. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." They lay back on the blanket, Katherine's head on Kieran's shoulder, and watched clouds drift across the blue Wyoming sky. From the direction of the cabin, they could faintly hear the children's laughter carried on the wind. Their ranch spread out around them, a testament to years of hard work and love. "I want to grow old with you," Katherine said softly. "I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want decades more of this, of us." "Then that's what we'll have," Kieran said, kissing the top of her head. "I plan on being with you for a very long time, Katherine Dalton. You're stuck with me. Promise?" she asked, echoing the question she'd asked him on their wedding day. "Promise," Kieran said, just as he had then. They stayed in the meadow until the sun started to set, talking about their dreams for the future, making plans for the ranch and the children's education, simply enjoying being together without the demands of 5 children pulling at their attention. Finally, as the sky turned pink and gold, they rode back to the cabin where their family waited. The children ran out to greet them, all talking at once about their day's adventures. Kenneth, now 9 years old, had successfully broken his first horse. Caitlin had helped make dinner and declared herself a master cook. Kyle had found an interesting rock he wanted his father to identify. And the twins had gotten into the flour bin and covered themselves head to toe in white powder. Katherine and Kieran looked at each other over the chaos and laughed. This was their life. Messy, loud, exhausting, and absolutely perfect. As the years continued to pass, the Dalton family became a fixture in Jackson and the surrounding area. Kenneth grew into a skilled horseman like his father, and eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Caitlin showed her mother's head for business, and began helping manage the general store when she was just 15. Kyle surprised everyone by showing an interest in medicine and eventually went to study in Denver to become a doctor. The twins, Kevin and Kendra, remained inseparable, and both showed talent with horses, working together to expand the breeding program. Katherine and Kieran watched their children grow with pride and occasional heartache. It wasn't always easy. There were seasons of drought that tested the ranch's resilience. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of frontier life. Kenneth broke his leg when he was thrown from a horse. Caitlin nearly died from scarlet fever when she was 12, and Katherine and Kieran spent 3 terrifying days at her bedside before the fever finally broke. Kyle struggled with confidence, always feeling like he didn't quite fit the cowboy mold until he found his calling in medicine. But through every challenge, Katherine and Kieran faced it together. Their love had been forged in the crucible of risk and choice, of overcoming fear to fight for what they wanted, and that foundation made them unshakable. On the hard days, they remembered how close they'd come to losing each other, and that made them grateful for every day they had together, even the difficult ones. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, their children surprised them with a party at the ranch. Kenneth had ridden to every neighboring ranch and into town to personally invite people. Nearly 100 people showed up to celebrate Katherine and Kieran's enduring love. Tom Bradley, now retired from the saloon, stood up to give a toast. 20 years ago, I watched these two people choose each other against all odds. Katherine Turner, as she was then, rode out of town after this man like her life depended on it. And Kieran Dalton turned his horse around and came back to the woman he loved, even when he thought that love wasn't returned. That's the kind of courage and devotion we should all aspire to. They've built a beautiful life together, raised 5 wonderful children, and shown this community what real partnership looks like. Here's to 20 more years and beyond. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Katherine felt tears prickling her eyes as she looked around at the gathering. Their children, now ranging from 19-year-old Kenneth to the 14-year-old twins. Their neighbors and friends, people they'd worked alongside and supported through 2 decades of frontier life. Aunt Marguerite had even made the long trip from Boston, now 70 years old but still sharp as ever. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Katherine and Kieran walked out to the meadow where they'd spent their 10th anniversary. The July night was warm and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. 20 years, Kieran said, pulling Katherine into his arms. 2 decades since I told you I loved you in the back room of your father's store and you broke my heart by telling me to leave. 2 decades since I realized my mistake and rode after you, Katherine added, and you were already on your way back to me. 10 miles, Kieran said, smiling at the memory. That's as far as I got before I had to turn around. Not very far at all, really. It was far enough, Katherine said. Far enough to realize what you'd be losing. Far enough to know you had to come back. Those 10 miles changed everything, Kieran. If you'd kept going, if you'd been able to leave, we wouldn't have this life. Our children wouldn't exist. We'd both be somewhere else, probably miserable, definitely without each other. I don't like to think about that alternate version of our lives, Kieran said, holding her tighter. I only want to think about this version, the real one where we fought for each other and won. We did win, Katherine agreed. We won everything worth having. They swayed together under the stars, almost like dancing, though there was no music except the sound of the wind and the distant call of an owl. Katherine thought about the terrified young woman she'd been, so consumed by the fear of loss that she'd almost created the very loss she feared. She thought about how love had healed that fear, how Kieran's steady presence and devotion had taught her that taking risks was worth it when the reward was a life filled with love. "I'm so proud of our family," Katherine said. "Kenneth is such a hard worker, and he's going to make the ranch even better than we have. Caitlin has such a good business mind. Kyle is going to help so many people with his medical skills. And the twins, they're going to take the horse breeding program to new heights." "They learned from the best," Kieran said. "They watched you run a business and manage a household with grace and strength. They watched me work hard and treat animals and people with respect. But more than anything, they watched us love each other, support each other, face challenges together." That's the real legacy we're giving them, Katherine. Not the ranch or the store or the land, but the example of what a real partnership looks like. "I hope they all find what we have," Katherine said. "I hope they're all brave enough to fight for love when they find it." "If they learned anything from our story, they will be," Kieran said. "And someday, we'll be sitting on a porch watching our grandchildren play, and we'll tell them about how their grandfather only made it 10 miles before he had to turn around and come back to their grandmother. And how their grandmother rode after him because she was too stubborn and too in love to let him go," Katherine added, laughing. "It's a good story," Kieran said. "Our story. I wouldn't change a single word of it." "Neither would I," Katherine said. "Not even the hard parts, because they led us here." They stayed in the meadow for hours, talking and reminiscing, holding each other and counting their blessings. Finally, as the moon rose high overhead, they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next together. The years continued to unfold. Kenneth married a sweet woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Katherine and Kieran their first grandchild in 1900, a sturdy little boy they named Michael. Caitlin married James Robertson, the young man who'd been managing the store all these years, and they took over the business completely, allowing Katherine to focus on the ranch. Kyle returned from Denver as a qualified doctor and set up a practice in Jackson, where he was beloved for his skill and compassion. The twins both married in a double ceremony in 1904, Kevin to a rancher's daughter named Margaret and Kendra to a horse trainer from Cheyenne named Robert. As grandchildren started arriving, Katherine and Kieran found themselves entering a new phase of life. They slowly handed over more responsibilities to their children, while they took on the role of wise elders, helping and advising but no longer carrying the full weight of the ranch and business operations. On a warm afternoon in May 1908, Katherine and Kieran celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by their 5 children, 4 children-in-law and 8 grandchildren, with another on the way. They stood on the expanded porch of what was now a substantial ranch house and looked out at the empire they'd built. 30 years, Katherine marveled. She was 52 years old now, with silver threading through her dark hair, but her eyes were as bright and her spirit as strong as ever. "And I'd do it all again," Kieran said. He was 54, his hair more gray than dark now, his face weathered by decades of outdoor work but still handsome and strong. "Every single day I'd choose you all over again. Even that first day when I told you to leave," Katherine teased. "Especially that day," Kieran said, "because it led to you realizing what we had. It led to you coming after me. And it led to me turning around because I'd only made it 10 miles before I couldn't stand being away from you." Kenneth, now 29 and very much his father's son, raised his glass. "I want to make a toast to my parents. Growing up, I watched them build this ranch from nothing. I watched them support each other through droughts and hard winters, through injuries and illnesses, through all the challenges that frontier life threw at them. But more than that, I watched them love each other. Every single day, I saw my father look at my mother like she was the most precious thing in his world. and I saw my mother look at my father with the same devotion. They taught us what love looks like, what partnership means, what it takes to build a life together. Here's to 30 more years. Hear, hear. Everyone cheered, and glasses clinked all around. Later that evening, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Katherine and Kieran took a walk around their property. At 60-plus years old combined, they moved a bit slower than they once had, but they were both still healthy and active. They walked hand in hand to the meadow that had become their special place, the spot where they'd spent their 10th and 20th anniversaries. "Should we make this a tradition?" Katherine asked. "Every anniversary we come here." "I'd like that," Kieran said. "Though I have to admit I'm feeling the walk more at 54 than I did at 34, Katherine laughed. "We're getting old, aren't we?" "We're getting seasoned," Kieran corrected. "Like fine leather or good whiskey." They sat on the grass, not bothering with a blanket this time, and looked up at the stars. The Wyoming night sky never got old, never stopped taking Katherine's breath away. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if things had gone differently?" Katherine asked. "If I'd convinced myself not to go after you, if you'd made it further than 10 miles. "Sometimes," Kieran admitted. "Usually when I'm feeling particularly grateful, which is most of the time. I think about how easily we could have missed this. How a different choice, a moment of less courage, could have meant we spent our lives apart. And then I look at everything we have now, our children and grandchildren, this ranch, this life, and I'm overwhelmed by how lucky we are." "It wasn't just luck," Katherine said. "It was choice. We chose each other, we chose to be brave, we chose love over fear." "You're right," Kieran said. "And we've kept choosing each other every day since then. That's what I'm most proud of. Not just that we found each other, but that we've nurtured and protected what we found. We've built something lasting." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid comfort of his presence that had been her anchor for 3 decades. "I love you, Kieran Dalton. More now than I did 30 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible." "I love you too, Katherine," he said, kissing the top of her head. "You're still the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat there in their meadow, under their stars on their land, surrounded by the evidence of their love and hard work. 30 years of marriage, 5 children, 8 grandchildren and counting, a successful ranch, a thriving business, respect in their community, and most importantly, a love that had only grown stronger with time. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and sorrows as they always do. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with laughter and life. Katherine and Kieran gradually handed over the last of their responsibilities, moving fully into retirement. They spent their days riding through their land, visiting their children and grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. There were losses, too. Tom Bradley passed away in 1912, and Katherine wept at his funeral, remembering how he'd been one of the first people in Jackson to support her marriage to Kieran. Aunt Marguerite died peacefully in her sleep in 1915 at the age of 82, and Katherine traveled to Boston for the funeral, grateful that her aunt had lived long enough to see how well things had turned out. But the core of Katherine and Kieran's life remained solid and unchanging. Their love for each other, their pride in their family, their gratitude for the life they'd built. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, they celebrated more quietly than in previous milestone years. The world was in the grip of the Great War in Europe and the influenza pandemic, and large gatherings didn't feel appropriate. Instead, their children and grandchildren came to visit in smaller groups throughout the week, bringing love and laughter and keeping their distance as much as possible to protect Katherine and Kieran from the flu. On the actual anniversary day, July 15th, Katherine and Kieran took their traditional walk to the meadow. They were both in their 60s now, Katherine 62 and Kieran 64, and the walk took longer than it used to. But neither of them minded. They had nowhere else to be except together. 40 years, Kieran said as they settled onto a blanket Kenneth had brought out earlier in the day. 4 decades since you became my wife. 4 decades since I made the best decision of my life, Katherine said. Well, the second best decision. The first was going after you when I thought I'd lost you. And I made it 10 miles, Kieran said, the familiar refrain of their story. 10 miles before I had to turn around. 10 miles, Katherine repeated softly. Such a short distance, really. You could walk it in a few hours. But it represented everything. It represented you realizing you couldn't leave, that love was more important than pride or hurt feelings. And when I rode after you and saw you coming back, I knew that we were going to make it. If we were both willing to fight for each other, we could overcome anything. And we have, Kieran said. We've overcome drought and disease, financial hardship, and family struggles. We've raised 5 children into good adults. We've built a legacy that will last for generations. And through it all, we've had each other. Katherine looked at her husband, seeing the lines that time and weather had etched into his face, the gray in his hair, the slight stiffness in his movements that came with age. But she also saw the same blue eyes that had looked at her with such hope and heartbreak 40 years ago in the back room of her father's store. She saw the same gentle strength, the same loving heart. I would marry you all over again, she said. If I could go back to that day 40 years ago, knowing everything that would come, all the hard times along with the good times, I'd still say yes. I'd still choose you. And I'd still ride out of town, Kieran said. And I'd still only make it 10 miles before I turned around. Because even on that worst day when I thought you didn't love me, I couldn't actually leave you. My heart wouldn't let me. We were meant to be together, Katherine said. I truly believe that, not in some mystical way, but in the sense that we chose to be together. We made a commitment and we honored it. We built this life with intention and love. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple, Katherine and Kieran held each other and watched the day fade into night. They'd watched this same sunset thousands of times over 40 years, from this meadow and from their porch and from countless other places on their land. And yet it never got old. Like their love, it was somehow both familiar and eternally new. I'm tired, Katherine admitted. These last few years, I feel the weight of my age, but I'm not ready to be done yet. I want more years with you, Kieran. I want to meet more grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren. I want to sit on our porch and watch the sun set 1,000 more times with your hand in mine. Then that's what we'll do, Kieran promised. I'm not ready to be done either. I plan on loving you for as long as I possibly can. They made their way back to the ranch house as true darkness fell, walking slowly, supporting each other. 2 people who'd become so intertwined over 40 years that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The years that followed were gentle ones. Katherine and Kieran's children made sure they never had to work too hard, that they were comfortable and cared for. They spent their days much as they pleased, riding when they felt up to it, sitting on the porch and entertaining grandchildren, telling stories about the old days when Jackson was just a small frontier town and they were young and building their dream. On a warm afternoon in August 1920, Katherine and Kieran sat on their porch watching their great-grandson, little Henry, the son of Kenneth's oldest boy, chase chickens around the yard. They were holding hands as they always were, and Katherine felt a deep sense of peace and completion. You know what I was thinking about, she said to Kieran. What's that? That day you left. The morning of June 10th, 1878. Do you remember what time you rode out? "About 10 in the morning," Kieran said. "Why? And you made it to Munger Creek before you turned around?" "That's right. Took me about 2 hours. I sat there for maybe 30 minutes trying to convince myself to keep going, and then I gave up and headed back. And I rode out after you around 1 o'clock," Katherine said. "Which means if you hadn't turned around, I would have caught up with you at Munger Creek or just past it. We would have found each other either way." Kieran smiled, squeezing her hand. "I like to think so. I like to think that somehow we would have always found our way to each other." "We were meant to be," Katherine said simply. "All the fear, all the obstacles, all the reasons we shouldn't have worked out, none of it mattered in the end. Love won." "Love always wins," Kieran said. "When it's real love, when you're willing to fight for it, it wins every time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Henry play, listening to the sounds of the ranch around them, feeling the warmth of the summer sun and the warmth of each other's presence. This was what happiness looked like, Katherine thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those had their place in their story. Real happiness was this: ordinary days spent with the person you loved, building a life together one moment at a time. Katherine Turner Dalton passed away peacefully in her sleep on a cold January night in 1926, at the age of 69. She'd been in declining health for a few months, and the family had gathered, sensing the end was near. Kieran had been beside her, holding her hand, when she slipped away. The funeral was held on a clear winter day, and it seemed like half of Wyoming came to pay their respects. Katherine had been a pillar of the Jackson community for nearly 50 years, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother and grandmother, and one half of a love story that had become local legend. Kieran spoke at the funeral, his voice strong despite his grief. "Katherine was the bravest person I ever knew. 47 years ago, when I told her I loved her and she sent me away, I thought I'd lost everything. But Katherine was braver than her fear. She came after me, and when she found me, she told me she loved me and she chose us, over everything else. And she kept choosing us, every single day for 47.5 years. She chose love over fear, partnership over independence, risk over safety. And because she was brave enough to make that choice, we built this incredible life together. We raised 5 amazing children. We created a legacy that will last for generations. But more than any of that, we loved each other well. That was Katherine's greatest gift to me and to all of you. She loved well, fully, bravely. And I will carry that love with me for whatever time I have left." Kieran lived for 3 more years after Katherine's death. Years he spent mostly on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about Katherine and their life together. He told about how she'd ridden after him when he left Jackson. He told about how he'd only made it 10 miles before he had to turn around. He told about their wedding day, about building the ranch, about raising their family. He told the stories over and over, and his audience never tired of hearing them, because they were stories of true love and courage and commitment. On a spring morning in 1929, Kieran Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. His children found him in his bed, a small smile on his face, and on his nightstand was a faded photograph of Katherine from their wedding day. They buried him next to Katherine in the small cemetery outside Jackson, under a headstone that reads simply, "Kieran Dalton, 1854–1929. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He rode out of town but only made it 10 miles before love brought him home." The Dalton Ranch continued to thrive under the management of Kenneth and his children. The general store in Jackson remained a family business, passed down through Caitlin's line. Kyle's medical practice was taken over by one of his sons, continuing the family tradition of service to the community. The twins' descendants continued to breed and train some of the finest horses in Wyoming. But more than the physical legacy of land and business, Katherine and Kieran left behind a legacy of love. Their children all had strong marriages, having learned from their parents' example what real partnership looked like. Their grandchildren grew up with the story of how great-grandma Katherine rode after great-grandpa Kieran, and how he'd only made it 10 miles before he turned around, unable to leave the woman he loved. The story became part of family lore, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder that love required courage, that fighting for what you wanted was worth it, that the best things in life were worth taking risks for. Decades later, Katherine and Kieran's great-great-grandchildren would walk the land their ancestors had claimed and improved. They'd stand in the meadow where Katherine and Kieran had spent every anniversary, and they'd feel the weight of that love, that legacy. They'd visit the graves in the cemetery and read the headstones, piecing together the story of two people who'd chosen each other against the odds and built something lasting. The story of the cowboy who left town to forget her, but only made it 10 miles before he had to turn around, became part of Jackson's history, told by old-timers in the saloon and by mothers to their daughters. It was a story about courage and second chances, about fighting for love, about the power of choosing the right person, and then choosing them again, every single day. In the end, Katherine and Kieran's story wasn't just their own. It became a testament to what was possible when two people were brave enough to fight for each other, to overcome their fears, to build a life based on love and commitment and partnership. Their 10 miles became legendary, a symbol of how close happiness can be if we're just willing to turn around and reach for it. And in that meadow on the Dalton Ranch, where wildflowers bloomed every spring and the mountains stood eternal watch, you could almost feel their presence on summer evenings when the light turned golden. Two souls who'd loved each other well, who'd built something lasting, who'd proven that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we find the courage to turn around and fight for what matters most. Their love story didn't end with their deaths. It lived on in every Dalton descendant who chose to be brave, who fought for love, who built partnerships based on mutual respect and devotion. It lived on in the ranch that still bore their name, in the store that still served the Jackson community, in the medical practice that still healed the sick. But most of all, it lived on in the hearts of those who knew the story and let it inspire them to be braver, to love more fully, to fight for what mattered. Because that was the true legacy of Katherine Turner and Kieran Dalton. Not just what they built, but what they proved was possible. That love could overcome fear. That courage could change everything. That 10 miles wasn't too far to turn around. That riding after someone you loved was worth it. That choosing each other every single day for a lifetime was the greatest adventure of all. And so the story endures, passed down through generations, a reminder that the best love stories aren't about perfection, but about two imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other. Katherine and Kieran's story, which began with heartbreak and fear on that June morning in 1878, which continued through their meeting on the road just 10 miles from Jackson, which grew through 47 years of marriage and countless challenges overcome together, became a light for others to follow. A proof that love, real love, the kind worth fighting for, could conquer anything. Their graves rest side by side in the Wyoming soil they loved, their names carved in stone, their story carved in the hearts of all who came after them. And on warm summer evenings, if you walk through that meadow on the Dalton Ranch, you might feel what their descendants always claimed to feel. A sense of peace, of rightness, of two souls so perfectly matched that even death couldn't truly separate them, because Katherine rode after him. and Kieran turned around after only 10 miles. And those two acts of courage created a love story that would never truly end.